Yeah, thanks, Kate. If you want to share our screen. Yeah. Good. Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our virtual site visit with Meadow Ridge Elementary, one virtual visit in our series of virtual visits with our first 5 demonstration sites from across Washington State. At the Herring Center for Inclusive Education at the University of Washington, we are thrilled to be partnering with OSBI and some exemplary schools, one of which is here to share their journey with you today. We would like to introduce you to the Herring Center team. Here today is Herring Center Director, Dr. Eileen Schwartz, Inclusion Specialist Cassie Martin and Katie Bateman, who will be monitoring the Q&A and the chat. I am Rena Marie Leon Guerrero, and I will be leading us through the webinar today. Our program coordinator, Molly Lyman, is also here. She will make sure you have everything you need in case you experience any technical issues. As we get started, please test your audio in the bottom left-hand corner of your menu. Before we dive in, let's make sure we are set up for the webinar. Thank you for sharing comments and ideas in the chat. Because of the number of people participating today, we will not be answering questions or responding via the chat. If you'd like your presenters to answer a question, please use the Q&A feature instead. We will be recording today's webinar, and it will be provided on the Herring Center's demonstration sites webpage by the end of the month. As we go through the webinar, please keep this webinar etiquette in mind. We encourage a growth mindset where you are open to thinking about new ideas and willing to push yourself to grow. Thank you for joining us for today, for being present, positive, and engaged. In your Zoom invite, we sent you an impact form that included some pre-webinar planning. Please have your impact forms available to reference during today's presentation and consider sharing what you wrote as you ask questions and participate. You will notice the second page is a place to document ideas you can take back to your school team, share with colleagues and or families. We hope you will utilize the tool to support your learning. This is what the impact form looks like. Let's practice the chat. Using your impact form, please share what impact you hope today's webinar will have on your school's inclusionary practices. We will be able to reference this information later, and it will be useful for us in future planning. A friendly reminder that if you have any questions, we will be doing our best to monitor and respond in the Q&A at the bottom of your screens. To start, here's a little background information about the Demonstration Sites project. In the fall of 2019, OSPI launched the Inclusionary Practices Professional Development Project. The Herring Center partnered with OSPI to coordinate and lead this part of the larger statewide project, creating model demonstration sites that highlight inclusionary practices across Washington State. The Demonstration Sites project was developed to provide educators from around the state with the opportunity to observe inclusionary practices in action, meet with school teams, collect artifacts that aid in systems change, and learn about how to implement inclusionary practices in different school contexts. Over the course of 2 years, 16 model demonstration sites across all 9 ESD regions will provide professional development to visiting schools. Our demonstration sites highlight the diversity in our state. They include urban schools, rural schools, and schools in some of our largest and smallest districts across Washington. In collaboration with Herring Center Inclusion Specialists, demonstration sites host visiting schools to showcase high leverage inclusionary practices. By sharing these practices and opening their doors to teachers, administrators, families, and community members, it allows visitors to see best practices in action and apply them in their schools. At the same time, the demonstration sites themselves to continue to grow their inclusive culture and refine their practices that contribute to equitable learning for all students. There are some founding principles that drive our model demonstration site work. To start, in every school there are things that are working well. In education, we have the tendency to examine the problems associated with our practices instead of examining what's working well, why it's working well, and how we can use that information to make things better. This asset-based approach is a productive way for schools to leverage their strengths to become more inclusive. Also, inclusion is not a special education initiative, but is a cultural initiative. If we simply change the way we deliver special education services without considering the culture of the school or how all students engage in teaching and learning, we will never make the changes we need to truly impact student learning. Through the course of our webinars, you will hear from demonstration sites that are doing extraordinary things. What is exciting about these schools are that whether they are in year 1 of their journey or if they are 6 years in, they all have plans for continuous improvement. They recognize that as new students enter their building and as they collect more information about the best way students learn, that their professional practices need to reflect that learning. Demonstration sites also know that engaging stakeholders in the reform process is a critical component to making and sustaining changes. When stakeholders are involved, there's a higher likelihood that schools will adopt and implement inclusive practices. Our demonstration sites showcase close partnerships between school leaders and teachers, engaging in true distributive learning, leadership, making decisions, and moving forward collaboratively. We know that there are systems in place in some districts and not others. However, learning how demonstration sites have implemented high leverage moves can have wide-reaching benefits. You will notice the demonstrate sites principle is involved in the webinar today. We just mentioned the importance of distributive leadership and stakeholder engagement, but we would be remiss if not to mention the importance of innovative site-based leadership to support this work. Our goals for the demonstration sites are both simple and complex. We want to make sure that when school personnel or teams visit demonstration sites, or in this case, hear about their journey, that it provides a transformational learning experience. To do this, we are studying and implementing best practices and model demonstration site replication to ensure that our visitors or participants have an experience where they are inspired and leave with ideas for implementation in their schools. We also want to create peer learning communities between demonstration sites that build professional networks in our state. Through this project, we aren't only impacting visiting schools, but are working with demonstration sites to continue to evolve and change as they learn more about their students and best practices, or as their school culture continues to change. Because one of our founding principles is that inclusion is a cultural initiative, demonstration sites show that when we put best practices in place for students with disabilities and consider how we implement these practices in general education content and context, it improves outcomes for all students in our schools. We already talked about taking an asset-based approach and creating a culture of collaboration across Washington State schools. An important goal for this project is to improve the social and academic outcomes for students with and without disabilities, and to show that when we do things that are better for students, it is typically better for adults too. At the end of our webinar, we want you to leave with some key takeaways that you can bring back with you and back to your school team. This will include information, tools, and supports you can use to build, implement, and sustain an inclusive school. We know this isn't exactly the same as being able to see these schools and classrooms in action, but are thrilled you are joining us today as we share some exemplary inclusionary practices and take you on one school's journey. First, we will start with some polling to see who is joining us today. You can go ahead and share it in the chat or in the poll who is here with us today. Thank you. Let's see if we got any teachers, administrators, school counselors, parents, specialists, paraprofessionals, speech and language pathologists. This is great, really diverse participation. I'm very proud to introduce the amazing team from Meadow Ridge Elementary. I'm handing it over to Principal Chris Backman, who will introduce the rest of the team.
Well, good morning, everyone. So excited to be here. Bear with us as we switch screens. Okay, Rena Marie, can you see that okay? Is that shared now? Okay, perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. I am Chris Backman. I'm proud to say I'm principal of Meadow Ridge Elementary School, and I'm very excited to introduce my team to you today that's here. And it's so great to already read some of the comments of what you're here for. We certainly hope to begin to share part of our story, which we hope can benefit yours a little bit. And so I'm just going to quickly run through all the panelists that are here today, and then you'll get to meet them throughout the presentation. So beginning with Lisa Horn, my assistant principal. Cami Shimenti is a 4th grade teacher, and she's also the lead for our PBIS team. Liv Boschma is one of our 1st grade teachers, and she is a member of our Guiding Coalition team. Katie Scott is one of our LAP teachers, and she is on our Guiding Coalition team, as well as she is doing her admin internship with me this year, so she's doing a little bit of everything. Shannon Dennis is a 4th grade teacher and is our lead facilitator for the Guiding Coalition team. And last but certainly not least is Jessica Rumberger, who is one of our special education resource room teachers, and she also serves on the Guiding Coalition team. And I will turn it over to Lisa Horn to introduce Meadow Ridge.
Good morning, everyone. We're really excited to be here. Meadow Ridge Elementary is in the Meade School District, which is just north of Spokane. We are in kind of a suburban school district with about 81% of our students being Caucasian and about 29% being from a low-income family. We have 3% EL and about 4% of our kiddos are homeless under McKinney-Vento. We have this year around 600 kids pre-K through 6th grade, but that's going to change for us next year as there's been some boundary revisions. And so next year, Meadow Ridge is scheduled to be a kindergarten through 5th grade school of about 400 students. So you'll hear in our story how that's impacting what we're gonna do in the coming years. So on the next slide, you see the Meadow Ridge tagline, and really it is kind of the heart of what we do, and it's the red line that goes through the rest of this presentation. You matter, you belong, we are Meadow Ridge. And you're gonna hear from our teachers and team today how impactful that is to students and staff. There's a real sense of belonging at Meadow Ridge, and you can see just some of our little faces and our teachers and other staff working with kids here on this slide. Today, we're excited to share with you highlights from the following inclusionary practices. I want to note that it's just going to be highlights. We had to work so very hard to get it to fit into the time frame, and so I'm sure you'll be left with still some questions to come, but that's great because that means you can come visit us at some point. So we will be talking about the stages of our journey from year 1 to year 4. You can see in the graphic there kind of the outline of the Meadow Ridge plan that hangs on the board in Chris's office. You'll see year 1, year 2, year 3, and we're going to talk about it in that order. So first you'll hear about PBIS and how that was launched, and then we'll talk about master schedule, and then we'll talk about RTI, and you'll hear about leadership development as kind of a common thread running throughout, and you're certainly going to see it as evidenced by the team that's going to share with you today.
So the first question the team wanted us to share is, why do we start looking at our inclusionary practices? And well, this is a big question and we can spend a lot of time doing it. I just wanted to pull from the OSPI report card to kind of show the front page of our school. And you can see between ELA, math, and science, we're in the mid to upper 60s for most of our scores. And that has remained the trend for a number of years at Meadow Ridge. And this was my third year as principal. When I first came in, the sense at Meadow Ridge was doing okay. We about 2/3 to almost 3/4 of our students were meeting proficiency. And over the last couple of years, we've really changed that along the theme of you matter, you belong, we are Meadow Ridge. So all students matter, and we are not satisfied that not all of our students are meeting the proficiency standards for ELA, math, and science. And so you're going to hear the journey we've been on, and we are still on that journey. We certainly don't have it all figured out, but we're excited to kind of share the steps we've been taking to make sure that the one out of 3 students right now, based on these numbers, is not making proficiency at Meadow Ridge, and we want to radically change that. So this is the multi-year plan and vision that you're going to kind of see as the outline of today's journey. And Lisa mentioned it earlier, showed the picture of what's hanging on my board right now, what our journey has been. And so the first year coming in as a principal was just about relationship building and building that culture, and really having a shift in our PBIS system. And you're going to hear a lot more details about that in a moment. Year 2 is about creating a master schedule. We did not have a master schedule when I came in. In my first year, we did not have a master schedule as well. And so that's one of the inclusionary practices that really had a pretty significant impact on student inclusionary work in the classroom. You're also going to hear about our instructional leadership team, which is now called the Guiding Coalition team. And then year 3, which is this year, it was really about the school-wide RTI launch, data team meetings, and further developing our PLCs. And at the end, we'll talk about kind of our next steps as we look forward to next year and moving forward.
Okay. Excuse me. Good morning. I am going to talk about our year number 1 journey. And like both Chris and Lisa said, I'm just going to kind of give you a little taste of that. And so for our year number 1, all of the decisions that we made were based on feedback that Chris was given when he first became our principal. And we really decided that PBIS was the most important thing, as well as developing clear and consistent communication, and that we were going to be really, really deliberate on what we chose to focus on. Christy, there you go. All right, so how did we get there? When we first started with PBIS, we had about 6 or 7 teachers that had received training, and we were trying to get some things off the ground. And through that feedback that Chris received, we really wanted to focus on the structure and the culture of our school. And so we decided that there needed to be representation from every single grade level, as well as our specialist groups and our paraeducators. So that was the first thing that we did. And then we also decided that it was really important for our group to have norms that we would follow, so that not only did the entire group have an agreement, but when we presented things to our staff, that then our staff knew that there was a process. And again, you're going to kind of hear us talk about how we developed the culture of our building, and that was really important for us. It was safe, it was well thought out, it was planned, and so that really was how we started the foundation of this entire journey that we are on.
And to add into Cammie's, thank you, Cammie, that's great. And for a lot of the principals in the room and teacher leaders, you'll see the 80% approval on one of the PBIS norms. And the reason we did that is when I came in, there was a lot of concern amongst the staff that maybe 2 or 3 naysayers would sideline everything from happening. And so we brainstormed as a staff, and specifically as a PBIS team, to agree that if we had 80% approval, that we were going to move forward, and everyone had to be on board with that. You didn't get to sit on the sidelines and not participate just because you personally didn't agree with what we were doing. And that mantra and mindset has really been threaded throughout every initiative we've launched. And so you'll hear that. So you'll hear me talk about this a lot. when buildings will say, oh, my staff's not ready to do this. Well, not everyone on our staff was ready to do it as well, but we had norms in place that really didn't allow them to not participate going forward.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Chris. So one of the things that we also decided as a team is that we were not going to launch this PBIS plan with our staff until we as a team were 100% ready. And we also thought that we wanted to kind of baby step things. And so we decided to begin the year with really just two expectations. The first was we developed about 8 different lesson plans for our staff to teach within the first 2 weeks of school that taught our common expectations for places around the school, such as the cafeteria, the hallway, out at recess, in the bathroom, things like that. And so we could ensure that our kids were hearing the same thing in every single classroom. And those expectations were created based on the acronym, excuse me, that we have for our school, which is PAWS, which is practice responsibility, always do your best, we are respectful, and safety first. And so everything that we did directly related to that. And then along with that, we decided that we would have a voice thermometer, again, to just really work on common language throughout the school. And so we made posters of our voice thermometer and had them in the cafeteria, and each teacher was also given a copy of the voice thermometer as well. So before school began, at the beginning of the year, they had 8 different lesson plans that they could put in at their earliest convenience, and then they had a voice thermometer to really begin so that all kids had the same expectations everywhere they went. And then secondly, we broke our team up as we progressed throughout the year into 3 different groups. And one of the groups was in charge of creating monthly lessons. So each teacher was given a folder that had lessons that they could teach every single month. And these lessons were not only given to teachers in a paper format, but they were also given electronically. And each one has video resources, book resources, even a link to character counts, which was a program we were using previously. So we really tried to find a way to create everything so that it was in a nice, neat, tidy package for teachers. And then along with that, another one of our groups was the school preparation group. And so you can see there is a large poster of our PAW that we created. And every classroom was also given one of these to display in their room, wherever they would like. And we have them all over the building. And then we have, though, this great bulletin board in our cafeteria that has a bucket that says, "Fill me up." And what that is for is, you'll hear in a minute, we created these PAWS tickets, and they would go in that particular bucket. But we thought it was really important to have everywhere the kids went in our school, posters and things like that that would remind them of what we were doing, even down to in the bathroom. Every single bathroom had posters in there with specifically, what are you supposed to do when you're in the bathroom? This part was, I think, the best decision that we ever made. And so at our school, we use what are called PAWS tickets. And as you can see there, it says reimagined, because we did use PAWS tickets before, but we just found that they weren't super successful. And so what we decided as a group was to treat our PAWS tickets almost as like a currency, and so that they had real meaning. And so each teacher, we decided each month was going to get 32 tickets. And then along with those lessons, there were specific ways you could give out tickets to students. And from there, if a student got a PAWS ticket, you can see there's a little picture of a bucket. They would get to put their PAWS ticket in a bucket, and then they would receive a stamp on their hand. This was fantastic in really increasing that home and school relationship, because at that point in time now, kids were going home with a stamp on their hand, and that really, causes parents to say, "Hey, what's on your hand? Why do you have that? What did you do today?" And the best part was our kids could tell them what they were doing and why. I did this, I did this, I got a pause ticket. And so from there, we developed these weekly pause drawings and these whole school rewards. And so we had another team that was planning really our incentives and our rewards. And again, all of this planning went into place before it was ever presented to the staff as a whole. And so we decided that we were going to have a weekly drawing, and this drawing was going to take place every single morning over our intercom. And you can see there we had a chart with the date that the drawing was going to be, what the incentive was going to be, what supplies, where it was going to happen, and who was in charge. And the most amazing thing happened, really the first time we ever did this, is you could have heard a pin drop. Kids were so excited to hear their name called. They were cheering for each other. They were celebrating each other. And then the pictures that you can see there are just of some of the amazing rewards that we've done. Kids have gotten opportunities. We've done art projects. We've done root beer floats. We've done rewards in front of the entire school at an assembly. We even got to have the police SWAT team come here, and kids got an opportunity to do that. It's really, really been amazing. And the kids pay attention to that jug every time they're in the cafeteria to see it filling up, to see if they've met their goal for a whole school reward as well.
And I just have to say a note here. So from a leadership perspective, Lisa talked at the beginning about the red thread that would go throughout, which is kind of the leadership development aspect of this. And as principal, this is one of those times where I had a team that was really motivated to implement a new PBIS system. And you can see from Cammie's presentation and her enthusiasm, and I had a whole team doing this. And so we were walking through some protocols to make sure we were hitting all aspects of the PBIS system. And we really wanted a really powerful incentive program. And so when the team kind of came up with these ideas about the drawings where kids would get individually recognized with a hand stamp, they'd have a chance to weekly get a randomized drawing, and then we'd have 3 or 4 whole school rewards every single school year. At first I was thinking, yeah, monthly incentive sounds great because that's a lot of work. And then team said, no, we need to do it every week. And I had a leadership moment where I could have shut them down and said, that is just too much work. We can't do it once a week. But I decided to go with it and think, oh, if it doesn't work, we can redo it and change it to once a month. But I'll tell you, it was the best decision I ever made, to just keep my mouth shut and let the team run with it. And they have owned it. And you can see on the slide here, the spreadsheet kind of with the details of incentives. We've modified that and streamlined it as we've gone. It's funny when we were putting this presentation together to look at what we had even just a year and a half ago, because it's so changed now today from what we have, because we've just continued to learn and grow along the way. But my message throughout this presentation today to the leaders in the room is going to be, empower your staff, run with them. Even if you don't think it's going to go well, you'd be surprised of how well some of these ideas have gone. I just stepped back and gotten out of the way of the team.
And that this findings and data actually goes right along with that, because we kind of did ask Chris to get out of our way. We just said, no, we're doing this. And I think because we as a team were so excited, and I think because we also were so proud of this nice, neat, tidy package, that really our principal gave us permission to wait. I think that's a really important thing too. We waited until we as an entire team felt so confident about what we were doing that we could roll it out to our staff and know that we've taken everything into consideration. We did not want it to be just one more thing that was added to a teacher's plate, even down to cutting out all of the little pause tickets for each person. And really the results were that that students had fun. Teachers absolutely bought in because everything was done for them that we could think of as at the time. But the most important thing was that we as a team also were not married to any of the ideas we came up with. We asked for consistent feedback, and we were always adjusting. That was the great part. We were asking kids, what did you guys want to have as rewards? How did that reward work for you? Did you like it? Did you not like it? We had to come up with rewards that were appropriate for 5-year-olds all the way up to 12-year-olds. And so that can be tricky sometimes too. So to have constant feedback and let teachers have a voice and really feel heard, I think was the most important piece of this, because it really built solid trust and just the ability to all of us work together throughout this. And our Swiss data absolutely supports this. You can see that from 2018 to 2019, the number of kids that were kind of our tier 2, tier 3 kids was much larger than once we had almost an entire year under our belt. So the data speaks for itself. And if anybody, I wish you could come here and even talk to one of our kiddos, because they could talk to you for hours about how much they love pause.
So that year one really was a lot of PBIS work, and you can see a lot of the time and energy was spent pouring into that and getting that system up and going. And it didn't drop off the radar. It continued to be refined. But starting in year two, we started to pick up a couple more pieces of this process. One of those aspects that we looked at was developing some leadership within the building. And involving those key leaders and those key players in the building. And Chris does a really great job of putting people in positions where they can shine and giving them that opportunity to do their best as teachers and leaders in the building. So he involved those key leaders. He also launched a leadership team that was comprised of grade level representatives in the building. And that team really was working on collectively guiding the direction of the building and also aligning our MTSS vision for the building to that of the district, because the district was really doing a lot of work with MTSS and different systems of support. The leadership team also started to look at RTI and what that looked like and how we could possibly implement something like that in our building, and also looking at some PLCs. We have a great gift in our district of having quite a bit of time as grade level teams to work together, but we wanted to look and see how we can use that time a little bit more efficiently and effectively. Another thing that we started in year two was we started looking at our data in kind of a new and different way. We compile all of our data in spreadsheets, and those were shared with the teachers several times throughout the year. And previously, most of that data was really used to help identify students who would receive LAP services, and it was used almost for that sole purpose. But we started in year two to use that data in a bigger way, and used it to start grouping students within the classrooms based on their assessments and also based on the teacher input. And Shannon's going to talk a little bit about the master schedule.
Shannon, make sure to unmute yourself.
Sorry, take two. So we did not have a master schedule here at Meadow Ridge, which meant that students were being pulled out of different classrooms at various times a day. So for example, a student who was receiving reading services on an IEP might be pulled out at a different time than a student who is receiving LAP services for reading. And there were teachers in the building who literally were saying, I only have my whole class together for about 45 minutes. So it made it really, really hard as teachers to plan what our core schedule would look like in our classrooms. And it was equally as hard for our interventionists to plan their schedules and try to figure out when they could pull kids out of classrooms. So not having those core blocks aligned or defined, I felt like caused our school year to kind of lag at the beginning, because we were trying to figure out what does our classroom day look like, and then for the interventionists, what does their schedule look like? So what ended up happening were kids were missing big chunks of core instruction because they had to be pulled when the interventionist had time.
So a master schedule might seem like it's something that's almost, it's a simple move, but it really is incredibly beneficial to any kind of RTI system within a school. So the way that that was developed was Chris sent out some feedback forms to grade levels. So they worked together to have some frank conversations with each other about what was working well with the schedule, what tweaks needed to be made, and some suggestions for things to how to improve it. So we considered that feedback, and we also put that with the district instructional guidelines. So our district has some guidelines that are pretty set about how many minutes should be used for each subject area. And we really wanted to honor that, that document. So we put the feedback next to the instructional guidelines, and we kind of started from there, and we compiled a draft of our schedule. And we presented that draft over several sessions with various stakeholders, just having meetings to give it some fresh eyes, and made lots of adjustments and revisions along the way. But I think this was a little bit of a shift from how it was done previously, where I'm sure a lot of you have been a part of master schedule development, where you build a specialist schedule first and then you work your master schedule around that. But this really was coming at it from the other direction, and we built the master schedule first, and then we fit the specialists into it. But it was really important to have the perspective of lots of different people. We were able to honor a lot of the requests from the feedback forms, but unfortunately, you know, not everybody is going to get their way, but everybody was happy. It was good enough, I think, for them. And there was also a level of compromise on people's parts. When they were looking at that master schedule, well, they said, well, I want it all. We want the whole pie, but, you know, I'll live with just this piece or that piece. So that's how we worked on developing that master schedule for that year. And then this is kind of a snapshot of what it can look like. This, like Chris said earlier, a master schedule had not existed at Meadow Ridge previously. So this was a new concept for a lot of teachers who maybe hadn't had experience working in buildings that had something like this. And it wasn't just lining out lunch and recess and specialist times, but it really, the master schedule delineates what core time should be for ELA and math and the other subjects, but it also put in and aligned the interventionist schedules with LAP and special ed. And believe it or not, our master schedule really is a tool that helps communicate our values and what's important to us. So it was really important to us that all students across the entire building had the opportunity to receive equitable instruction opportunities that were based on their needs. And you can see that in our master schedule. And we also wanted to make sure one of our values was that students receive core instruction with differentiated supports. We didn't want students with IEPs to be pulled out of their core instruction and missing that. So the way that we set up our schedule was to maximize that time so that those students also were able to participate and receive grade level instruction. And that's really exciting, because then they don't feel like they're missing out and they're exposed to that level of instruction as well. So like I said earlier, our schedule defines that instructional time for core and intervention. I think Shannon talked earlier about how previously students would just be pulled out and all throughout the day. So it was nice to have that, that time together. It also dedicated the reading intervention time. Our school receives LAP funding. So those kiddos had a set time that they were receiving their LAP instruction. And one other thing that we were careful to do this year too was to assign paraeducators to each classroom during the reading intervention time. And that support was pushed into the classrooms with the expectation that that those paraeducators would be used to help with students within their groups happening in their classrooms. So that's a little bit about just kind of a snapshot about what it looked like year two, and you'll see a little bit later how that morphs into year three, because again, we looked at what was working well and what wasn't and made lots more tweaks that way too.
One of the other things, just to add on to what Katie said, is a huge shift as part of our master schedule when we launched it is the reading intervention. 30-minute blocks that we had for every classroom. Katie, did you talk about the paraeducators there? I can't remember, I'm sorry.
Yeah, in year 2, they were pushed into the classrooms to use kind of at the teacher discretion during the reading intervention time.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about that more because I had high hopes for that morphing into RTI and it just didn't quite happen. So we're going to talk more about that when we go into RTI.
And Chris, I'm going to jump back in a little bit. When you talk about kind of having hopes and things not going the way that it hoped, I hope that that people see, it wasn't pretty, it wasn't all done, it wasn't a tight ship when we were rolling it out, and there were a lot of lessons that we learned along the way. And we made changes and we regrouped, and that's okay.
Absolutely. And I know when the session began, a lot of folks in here were asking about master schedule. And we've kind of joked, we almost wish we could do 3 webinars. One, just 2 hours on master schedule. We could spend all day on it because there's so many different components to it. But one of the things for you to keep in mind when we launched it, even though we'd done a lot of planning the spring before we launched this, when it officially was rolled out in that August, and we spent some time on it during the principal days before school began, we did a lot of tweaks to it, just little things here and there, 5 or 10 minutes for transition here that we wouldn't think of because, when teachers walk it for the first time with kids, it can often look different. And so give yourself grace and some flexibility with it because you're just going to have to. There's going to be bumps along the way. We're in Spokane, and so the reality of snow pants and snow boots is a reality for transitioning to get to resource and lunch, for one example. And so we had to build in some creative things like that for our younger grades. And so every school is going to have its own quirks, and most of those things we can work out. The thing we didn't do, however, is we did not walk away from our values, which was having a dedicated 30 minutes of reading intervention every day, a dedicated 90-minute ELA block, a dedicated at least 60-minute math block, so on and so forth. So you can still do tweaks and changes without compromising your values.
And just to tag on to that, one thing that I think is very unique about the Meadow Ridge master schedule is a lot of times when you master schedule, you start with the things like recess and lunch and specialists. And this master schedule is built around instruction and learning. And those other pieces fit after that. So we really thought about the instructional needs of each grade level first and aligned that and prioritized that, and everything else came later.
Which was a big shift for our specialists who had a hard time not understanding why they weren't the first ones doing it. So there are difficult conversations you have along the way, and it's not that our specialists aren't important, they certainly are. But we really wanted our values to speak clearly that instruction comes first, and that we still found time for our music, PE, and library spots, and we worked all that out. But that is a huge shift of how this schedule was developed. Katie, do you want me to go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we learned along the way, I think there was a great sense of relief among staff members once we had the core schedule. Yes, there were small tweaks that had to be made, small changes, but it really truly was a reflection of putting our kids first and the schedule that we needed to build in order for all students to be involved in core instruction and get any services that they needed as well. So I know as a classroom teacher, it was a huge relief to go into the school year knowing this is when my core blocks are. These are when my students will receive additional reading services. It was all from the start. And I hope and think that it was also a relief for our interventionists because they also knew from the start of the year. So we didn't have this kind of frenzied run around trying to coordinate schedules. So I think a lot of people, even if they weren't aware that they needed the master schedule, once they had it in their hands and once we got to start applying it, it became very obvious that we had needed it for a long time.
So a couple of things that we learned along the way after that second year. And some of the outcomes of that year was that we were able to increase our core instruction by just simply coordinating the lab, the special education, and the general ed schedules. And Shannon spoke earlier about kids being pulled out quite a bit. And so we were able to tighten that up significantly. We were also able to increase the number of students that we served in our LAP program by about 33%. So that was pretty incredible. And there was a little bit of mixed results for how the paras were being used in the classrooms during that time. Some of the teachers were still having the paraeducators do some, cutting, stapling types of activities, where others were actually using them to help run groups and things like that in the classroom. So we took that learning into the next year. But we also found that our master schedule really improved our culture. And it was kind of a lot like, almost like a budgeting situation, where when you know what you have to work with and your guidelines there, you can actually really capitalize on the time that you have.
So another thing I mentioned this earlier. So the mixed results for use of paras during intervention. I had this grand plan of how can we allocate paras more effectively to really improve instruction. And when we launched it in our fall data team meetings with our master schedule, I had planted the seed, so to speak, with teachers of how great would it be if you coordinated services and even maybe shared kids between the paras and your grade level classroom teachers, and created different small groups. And people didn't shoot that idea down, but nothing really happened from that. Basically, there were small places where teachers are using paras in creative ways, but nothing consistent as a program. And that did not sit well with me. And so that's going to be kind of the launch for year 3, which we did this year, was really launching into a comprehensive school-wide RTI program.
Hello, I'm Jessica Rumberger, and I'm the resource room teacher here at Meadow Ridge this year. This is actually my very first year at Meadow Ridge, so this was kind of fun to come in to this position because I'd never been at a school before with a master's schedule, and I'd seen a lot of your guys' questions about special ed, so I'm super excited to answer them here for you. So coming in, the foundation of the PBIS and the master schedule was fantastic. We had these common area expectations that we continued to use and refine and use the pause tickets. And then also with the master schedule, they continued to refine that. So a big part of that was making sure students were in the beginning of their core instruction and not being pulled out during that teaching part of core instruction or the middle of core instruction. And so they were there for the teaching part, and then they came into me or the other resource room teacher or LAP for the second part, which would be like the practice part in the classroom. So they came to us then for their specially designed instruction. And then also with the master's schedule, I didn't hear it mentioned earlier, but I know previously they had also done, they did a Google Calendar for school Google Calendar that was shared with the whole staff, which was super awesome. So then all of the pause rewards were on the calendar, all the assemblies were on the calendar, staff meetings were on the calendar. So that way the communication was super open and nobody had any questions about when things were happening, which was really nice. And then this was the year that we really kicked off our RTI school-wide. And then we continued with our district and building guiding coalition, which is our leadership team. And like we said, we had a representative from each grade level team on our on our school guiding coalition. And that's also included LAP and special ed. So I get to be a part of the leadership team and have a voice for special ed there.
Okay, I'm Leif Boschma, and I'm a first grade teacher here at Meadow Ridge, and I kind of want to tell you about the RTI launch in year 3 here as it relates to our first grade story. And it will talk about the data meetings, student instruction, the groups we created regardless of student label, whether they were special ed, LAP, or EL, and then also how we determine what curriculum to use. So kind of a little backstory to our first grade team this year. There were 3 of us on the team. One had been here at Meadow Ridge for a couple of years. One was brand new to the district, so and also had not taught first grade before, so new to our curriculum, new to the Mead way, new to the Meadow Ridge way. And then I moved in from another school in the district, so I was learning the Meadow Ridge way, and it had been a few years since I taught first grade. So we kind of had a group of seasoned teachers with some pretty strong beliefs in our how and why we do things, and some very different PLC experiences. So as you can imagine, coming in also right before school, we did not get into our building till like the week before school started. So two of us were trying to move in to a classroom because of some construction that was going on. So we had this mad scramble, very little time to try to build relationship with each other, but kind of absolutely having to. And I think the one thing I noticed right off the bat was the culture here at Meadow Ridge was one of acceptance, of trust, and you just immediately were like, could take that deep breath of like, oh, okay, I can do it here. I can take on these challenges. There are staff that are here to support me, not to critique or criticize me, but to help pick up where I might be lacking or needing a little bit of extra support. So we, because of our different team makeup, we had some challenges to balancing nuts and bolts, and then the PLC side of it, really talking about student growth and data. So we had to figure out that balance that year. So when it came to data meetings, after we'd kind of gotten, toward the end of September, early October, we had at our data meetings, administration, the classroom teachers, the lab teachers, and the special ed teachers. And we came together, and I think first grade has one of the highest number of assessments we give, many of them one-on-one. So we had about 7 pieces of different data to look at for each kid. But of course, when you put those on a spreadsheet, you have to sort some way. So we chose one piece of data to sort by, and then we started with the child with the greatest need. And we went child by child down our data sheet. But we didn't just look at that one piece that was sorted by. We would talk about each child, and let's say, I believe we sorted by nonsense words. And so then we would talk about, yeah, well, they didn't do well on that assessment, but they really are fairly strong readers. So we had to really look at what lagging skill each individual child had. So as we grouped kids, we did not group them like, oh, let's take the lowest 4 to 6 and put them in a group, and then let's take the next. We really looked at what kind of a reader they were and what lagging skill they had. So Chris, if you want to move on to the next slide, you can kind of start to see how we grouped kids. It left at the beginning 4 kids that really only needed letters and sounds as their main, well, that was their greatest lagging skill. So we took those 4 kids and looked at them individually and said, whoa, they're still uniquely different. These 2 are at a different level than these other 2 when we broke them into 2 different groups. We found research-based curriculum to meet their needs. And then we moved up to the next group of kids and would find kids that had like lagging skills and would put them in a group, and we worked on our groupings that way. You'll notice in those bottom 2 groups, you'd think, oh, they're not just special ed kids. A couple were special ed, one was an EL, and one had no labels at all. So they were not at all based on any label that they may have come with. It was fun in that meeting because I would hear the lab teacher say, oh my goodness, that child was a lab all year last year, but look where they are now. And you'd hear things like that. And so we just grouped kids literally by skill and need. We didn't think about first who their teacher was or those kind of things. We just looked at the skill and the need. So once we had skill groups, Then we started assigning, of course, those kids with the greatest needs, we wanted certificated teachers working with them. And we grouped them into starting with those kids with greatest needs and just kept moving up. And so instead of like the previous year where the paraeducators were kind of pushed into the classroom, paraeducators were given groups, and they had groups of kids that were at grade level or beyond. But we were all given groups. We all worked with our group during that half hour of intervention, and every single group had a focus. So those 4 bottom kids started with one particular curriculum, and the entire rest of the grade level was working on phonics for reading and a little bit of another curriculum working on their phonological awareness too. Phonemic awareness and phonological awareness. So we really wanted to get that strong during our RTI groups. So that's kind of how we based our groups. And if Chris, you want to move to the next slide, you can see all the groups that we had there. So we first looked at skill, we next looked at curriculum, and last we started placing kids in groups, making sure the most highly needing kids with academics got a certificated teacher with them. So we did all of that, and I'm trying to look at, I want to make sure I don't miss anything here. We did provide trainings because the curriculum was new to most of us. So we did provide trainings. Chris and Lisa were amazing about quickly trying to get curriculum for us because it wasn't something we had in the building. And they were just amazing about helping us and supporting us with whatever need we had. Then as a team, we also provided some support to some of the paraeducators. We took times when like there was a whole school assembly to give them a little extra training. And then we came to Chris because our first grade team was very, we were very used to having small groups in our classroom and whole group instruction. So we always used to, when the special ed kids or the lab kids, they were pulled out, we would do small reading groups with kids within our own classroom. And then when they came back, we would give them a second dip, and then we would move on to whole group instruction. Well, this half hour where everybody's in a group all of a sudden shrunk what we needed to do for small group instruction, or what we felt like as teachers we needed to do, and our whole group instruction. And so we came to Chris and said, Chris, we don't have this figured out quite yet. We'd like a little more time, and can you give us a little more time to work this out? And that's where he came along and said, nope, we're gonna all start on the same day. He goes, I trust you guys will work this out. And so we through some, I'm sure, pulling of our hair and long hours and maybe in a little bit of tears, we dove in and we started, and felt like we were scrambling for a while, but the payoff was amazing. The students were all in groups where they felt very confident and were getting what they needed. Because of our strong PBIS system, we had norms that were just already, we started the first day, reviewed norms with everybody. The paraeducators are very much a part of supporting our PBIS, and so they felt empowered because they had the same system. They get tickets, they get to give out too, so they had the ability to kind of positively motivate the kids in their group. But the struggle was real. It really was. We really had a lot of wrinkles to iron out along the way. We had trained our kids one way, and we had to kind of retrain them a new way to deliver instruction. And here's what cracks me up. We feel like as a school, we've done a few things the backwards way. Instead of setting priority standards first we just dove in. And once we dove into this and realized, oh, I don't have as much time for my whole group instruction or for my double dip of small group instruction, we were now begging to do priority standards. And I think that's part of our end of this year, moving into next year, of trying to help set some of those so we can start the year out with that. Another thing we discovered along the way was that we had this, we would, started our groups and we went, whoa, this kid doesn't really fit. And we would we wouldn't wait till this next 6-week data meeting to switch them. We'd say, okay, how can we switch this? This child doesn't fit with this group. Their assessments look like they would, but they don't really. So we'd move them. Or then we would get a child that was just making so much progress so quickly, all of a sudden they were being kind of held back by their group, and how could we move them? So we did a lot of that, just a little bit of movement here and there and tweaking, so that by the time we were in the end of November, December, it was just a well-oiled machine. We were doing progress monitoring every 2 weeks, and the kiddos, when it was a progress monitoring day, they go, oh, no RTI. So I know that it was a real positive for our students too. And we really were seeing growth with our kids. So by January, when we had our data team meetings, we were sitting around a big table, and I think the people who didn't know whose classroom they were in couldn't tell, because so many different people could talk so much about the skills and abilities of each child, because they were shared among so many different teachers. And I think it became more of a not my class, but they were all our kids. So I think everybody has felt like it's been a very, very positive move, and I would never want to go back to the old way. So I guess that's kind of my first grade story, in a nutshell, is you've got to jump in and try. And it's well worth it.
So can I just jump in and support Leave here? Leave had maybe one of the hardest sections, and she did a great job talking about this, because often when you put presentations together like this, you want to take the people that are like, yep, gung-ho from the beginning. And I think Leave was really honest to say, whoa, I don't think my team's ready for this. And I so appreciate her honesty in telling her story. And there's dozens of teachers in the building that were like Leave and had reservations and concerns about RTI and really sharing all kids. But the growth and transformation culturally that's happened in our school, Leave touched on it. And it gets me emotional as a principal, because we sat in those data team meetings in January. And honestly, you guys, if I didn't look up who the classroom teacher was, I couldn't tell, because everyone could so articulately talk about the kids, because we were all sharing kids. And it really went from, these are my 22 kids in my first grade classroom, to these are our 60 kids in our grade level that we are all working with. And it's such a powerful shift. So great job, Leave.
Thank you.
I have to chime in a little bit more about that too, Chris and Leave. One of our values at Meadow Ridge is, all students, and we value you and you belong here. And it's one thing to say those words, but it's another thing to do something so drastic within your system that really shares those values out. So that, all students belong to all of us is incredible. And through our RTI system, that's been able to be demonstrated and communicated, because it creates that collective sense of ownership. And I think, data meetings previously, teachers would kind of sit back and listen while they were talking about a student from somebody else's classroom and wait for them to have a turn to talk about their student in their classroom. But like Chris said, now it's everybody's talking about these kids, because we're all sharing these students together. And that is very powerful to have that collective group effort rallying behind the students to get them everything that they possibly need to be successful. So what you're looking at right now, Leave was sharing just the first grade reading groups. What you're looking at is the entire school's reading group. So Every single student at Meadow Ridge is in at least a 30-minute RTI group for reading. Some of the students are in more than one group because their needs are a little bit more profound. So all the grade levels have these groups going on where they're shared across the classrooms, and it's a beautiful thing to see when it's time for groups to start. You see kind of this group of adults head to their spaces. The kids all get up, they shuffle around, they move to their areas, and we can do that. We've done, kindergarten does it, first grade does it, even the little guys. So it's really neat to see that system working, and it's neat to see all the kids getting exactly what they need.
So this picture is hanging in my office right now, and it's just a visual representation of what we're trying to do. So we have 91 groups throughout our school. And if you saw on the first page, there's an outline of red and an outline of green. The groups that are outlined of red are the kiddos that are below grade level proficiency. And so we try to keep those grade levels smaller and make sure there's a research-based or validated curriculum that the teacher is using with those students. And then off in the green, get up to enrichment. And we have enrichment opportunities for students and really pushing them beyond, when they're already at grade level proficiency, and teachers have been able to be really creative in meeting those needs too. So it's a really cool system. And this is a part of the presentation where I really wish you could all be here in our school when we had kids to see it in action.
What I love about this particular image is this represents a team of educators coming together and asking, what is this kiddo's greatest need? One of the things that I don't think was touched on is you see kind of headers in each of the bubbles that describes what that group is about, but we didn't create the headings first and then force the kids into the bubble. It was an open-ended question at our first data meeting. What is this kid's area of greatest need? And we formed the bubbles, we formed the groups based on that answer rather than having a preconceived notion. And I think that makes the work unique, and it's made it much easier to flex and be fluid as kids' needs change, because we don't have a preconceived notion about what they might need in the first place.
So I'm going to go into a little bit of the details about what made this a successful system. I've been in other buildings before where we've tried things like this and it hasn't maybe gone as well. So some of the things that really helped were to make sure we were really passionate about making sure that all of those students who were in that high risk category were receiving instruction from a research-based curriculum. So we kind of did, it's kind of funny to hear the process, but we did a lot of, beg, steal, borrow, put together as many things that we could that were research-based and get them in the hands of the teachers so that they had something to use for those students in those reading groups. And we really relied on Lisa's experience and her expertise in this, and then I had some experience using different programs as well. So not only did we put the kids in groups, but we put some tools in the hands of teachers to help with that. And then you can go to the next slide, Chris. Along with those new programs, we had to do some professional development. We wanted to make sure that people knew how to use those tools correctly and accurately. So we did a lot of training with our teachers. We also did a lot of training with our paraeducators. And we shifted the paraeducators from kind of doing a little bit more clerical types of things to actually teaching some groups. So we trained them how to use the programs. We also trained them how to help us with our progress monitoring system and assessment tools that we use. And then one of the other details after we got everybody into groups and everybody had tools was to find the space for it, which was a unique challenge in and of itself. I think it was just a couple days before school started, we ended up adding another classroom to our school, and we were just busting at the seams. So we dismantled our lap classroom, and that little cart that you see on the right-hand side, that's actually my entire classroom right there. And I just wheel that around the school with me everywhere I go. And that just has my stuff on it. So every nook and cranny is being used for groups across the school. We have groups in the cafeteria, we have groups in the library, we have, little hallway corners and everything that's being used. So you probably might have seen that also on the big data sheet of everybody, or the RTI groups, where it had everybody's greatest need, it had who was teaching that group, but also where they were teaching it, because that was important to think about too. And if you can get kindergartners to engage in a reading group in a cafeteria, I think you can probably do just about anything. So you're limitless there. One of the other details was communication with families. We wanted to make sure that our families were aware of the changes that we were making. Previously, students who were selected to receive LAP services would have gotten an identification letter from the school just saying your student was selected to be in LAP program. But rather than doing that just for individual students, we did letter to the entire school community explaining what RTI was, and that it was groups that were in addition to core instructions. We wanted to be clear that nobody was missing out on anything. That they were flexible groups that were based on the student need. And also, we wanted to also give credence to those students who are a little traditionally higher achieving. I think we spent a lot of time and energy talking about students who have higher needs and kind of are higher risk. But we wanted to make sure that those students who needed enrichment were also receiving what they needed as well.
Okay, so here is an example of how this new approach to RTI for our building really truly benefited a little boy who is in my 4th grade classroom. He has been a student at Meadow Ridge since kindergarten, but had some significant health problems, which led to a lot of absences, and then received a diagnosis in the first few months of 1st grade that led to him being out of school for the remainder of 1st grade, all of 2nd grade, and all of 3rd grade. During that time, he had some hospital school, he had some in-home tutoring, but he did not have the classroom experience or the core instruction that kids get when they get to be at school with their peers every day. So he came into the school year, and his parents were very honest and were really advocating that he was going to need some support, particularly with his reading. And so, you know, when you have this situation, you don't have data. You have some subjective input from people about what a child's needs might be, but we didn't have any data. So we did our beginning of the year assessments with him, and yes, it reflected that he was probably reading at about a mid-kindergarten level. However, at that point, we hadn't had any time to try specific interventions with him. He was just readjusting to being in school. He's absolutely precious. His favorite things were PE and recess and just being with other kids again. So we looked at how can we creatively serve this child's needs, and also be gaining data at the same time in the event that we needed to do a referral for special ed services. And so what we came up with was core instruction in my classroom. And then right away, he was actually pulled into one of the intervention groups that was running in our special education classroom. And he was served under that through his RTI, or for his RTI group, before he had an official IEP. Also, one of our LAP teachers started pulling him into a group that she was running during the day with some students who were working at about a 2nd grade level. So this student was getting triple dipped in reading before we ever did any special education testing for him, before he ever had an IEP. So I feel like something that happens a lot of times is that there's a process that has to be followed for students to receive services. And you can lose a lot of time while you're waiting for that process to run its course. And so for this particular child, this RTI truly served his needs, and he didn't have to sit idle or sit frustrated. We were able to communicate with parents, you know, these are the things that we're doing right now. This is the progress that we're seeing. And so that was really, really powerful to be able to know that we were already intervening, even though there was no label, there was no specific assessment that said what he needed. We just knew, and we were able to intervene for him. So anyway, he's one of the kids that I sure wish this school year could have gone on traditionally for, but this program worked perfectly for him, and the way that all these talented adults came around him to support him as he returned to school was just amazing.
Shannon, can I say something really quick? And I'm sorry, we thought it was going to be Chris who was interrupting more than anybody else, but sorry, everybody. I love the quick response that our RTI system affords. So when students who have some really high levels of need come in, our reaction is no longer panic and worry and things like that. It's our attitude is no problem. We got this. Let's find a spot for this kiddo and get this student plugged in where they need to be. So that's been really cool because it's helped us respond so quickly to the student needs. Sorry, I'll try to not interrupt so much anymore.
That's great.
Can I add one thing too? I think it's important to know that we have, like in first grade, some kids that have IEPs that are not getting their reading services necessarily by the resource room teacher, but they fit in a group that's being facilitated by maybe the lab teacher or a general ed classroom teacher.
Yes, that has been amazing. And that's been really eye-opening for me to realize like what resource room teachers had to do before. Because I think a lot of times you skim off those students who have IEPs and then you look at everybody else. But our system integrates them and puts them all in together, and it's looking at their needs. So yeah, I have students in my reading group as a lab teacher who have IEPs. There's also students who don't have IEPs that are in groups with other students who do. So it's really neat. And I know I'll probably say it again later and everybody will talk about this, but it really, it allows us to take the labels off the students and not look at those labels and put them into their boxes, but really truly looks at their needs.
Yeah, definitely. I think adding to that, I have a couple of fifth graders that are being taught by their gen ed teachers because they're at grade level essentially, and which also helps as a special education teacher to create groups within my classroom with not as much support, because traditionally we can make a bunch of small groups in my classroom or in the other special ed classroom, but you're still dealing with 6 different reading levels or 8 different reading levels. And so you're like, oh my gosh, how do I make these groups? What am I going to do? But this has really alleviated some of those groupings. And so I can actually give the instruction that each student needs. And like, for example, I have another 2 fifth graders, one's reading at a first grade level and one's reading at a kindergarten level. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what group am I going to put these kids in? How am I going to help them? And we had a couple 4th graders reading at about the same level as the one at first grade, and then same with the one reading at the kindergarten level. And so the grade levels were close enough also to not make them feel like they're being shoved in like a 1st or 2nd grade reading group. They're still with same age peers, but they're still getting the instruction they need, which was so powerful for those kids. That's just, it's really cool. It's making me miss all of our kids right now in all of our groups. So sorry to veer, but the slide that we're on, so this is our data spreadsheet. So when we came into our data meetings in the fall, Chris and Lisa and Katie had built this for us and they threw it up on the screen. And as teachers, we were like, oh my God, what are we looking at? There is so much information here. Can you just give us a second? Let us just digest this really quick. So yes, it was really overwhelming for a lot of classroom teachers, and even as a resource room teacher who's used to seeing a lot of data, having to pause a lot during the meeting and kind of ask questions. And Chris and Lisa and Katie, everybody was so great about letting us pause and take time to digest the information and taking time to figure out what does this say to us, and going through that and just that process of digesting all of this information, because looking at all this data can be super overwhelming. And so if you're looking at this, you're like, oh my gosh, what in the world am I looking at? But we felt the same way. So it took a little time to digest and look at this. So this was we started data meetings in October, and we all saw on our calendar, well, especially me as like a resource room teacher, I was like, why am I subbed out for like 4 days? What am I doing? Like, where's Chris doing with me? So they're, oh, okay, we're going to these data meetings. I really didn't know what they were about. And they kind of launched this RTI stuff, and we're like, oh, well, that's cool. And especially with the master schedule already being created, I didn't have to create a schedule for my resource room students. It was pretty much created for me. And so all of my students at the same grade level were all getting pulled for the same specially designed instruction at the same time. So let's say all of my 4th graders, even though they're in different classrooms, they're getting served for math, they're all getting pulled at the same time. So that was really helpful in that regard. So then with so now you're looking at 5th grade from this winter. So we changed, so you can see the fall scores and then the winter scores, and we want to see how they changed, how they grew, did they drop, do they have different instructional need now? But again, we went through student by student and focused on what their instructional need was first, and then we grouped them according to that and their specific need. And like Katie said, there were some students that may have dropped or didn't gain, and we're like, well, we have the system for it. Let's look at the other data. What is it telling us? And we had the right procedures to go through and group our students.
This data spreadsheet is what we maybe struggled with the most, of being able to try to communicate to you all through a webinar session of how powerful this tool is. It's very much a live and living document that we pull up constantly in IEP meetings and special ed team meetings and PLCs, and we look at the data live. And it's really important that we've created this spreadsheet. It's not a data warehouse. It's something that we created, that every grade level has their own spreadsheet. And we've added the data, both progress monitoring data and our screening benchmark tools from fall, winter, and spring, although spring's different this year, obviously, with school closure. But this has helped us so successfully, and we're going to do our best to try to share that as an artifact after the presentation, so you can go and look at it. But this is probably going to be the hardest thing for us to answer questions about without you getting to sit next to us on a computer screen and really understand it more deeply.
It's really fun to see how many people really use it, because it's a Google Doc. And so of course everybody's names are popping up, and you can see, oh, I like, even on the weekend I can tell, oh, Jessica's in there looking at something.
I always had it
open away. And it's really neat to see that it really is like the document that we live and breathe by.
Yeah. Well, to jump off that too, our referral rates for special ed were just out of control, to be honest with you. And so nobody got referred to special ed until they went through this process, until we looked at their numbers, until we looked at their interventions. Is this working? And so our referral rate went down, and the kids that actually need IEPs or specially designed instruction were getting it, because I was coming in. And so were all of these folks coming in as newer to the building, or like, why is this person on an IEP? Oh my gosh, what's going on here? But with this process, we're able to get everybody where they need to go and not overwhelm the system with referral rates as well with special ed. So this was probably, I know this is Chris's like favorite slide, which was super fun. We got to share, this is all of our results after 10 weeks of doing RTI. We got to share, this was super fun. We shared this at a whole staff meeting, and we got our superintendent and our assistant superintendent of the school district to be here and share this data with them. And it was so fun to share this data. So you can see at the very end, we have all of our high-risk students. That's where they were in the fall, those 89 students. 22 of those students went from being high risk to low risk. 24 of those students moved to some risk, and 41 stayed at high risk. And then if you move to the some risk, we had 46 move to low risk. And even on the tail end of things, 7 kids moved down to high risk. But the best part about our RTI system is that we had a plan, and we went to data meetings, full data meetings again here this winter, and said, whoa, what's going on with these kids? Let's look at their interventions. Let's look at their core. Let's look at all of their data. What could we do? And we could move them into the right group with, and even like students without IEPs. We got parent permission. Hey, we want to move them into this group with specially designed instruction with a special ed teacher. Is that okay? And didn't get a single no. Parents were so on board with this. Yes, let's get my kid into reading group. Then we didn't have to get them an IEP. We just got them in there and they got their reading instruction and what they needed.
One of the most frequently asked questions about this data slide is, well, how was it different from the previous year? And so just to give you perspective on our high-risk students, the growth from 89 down to just 41 in the winter, that's only 41 students in the entire school that are at high risk, by the way. That's a celebration, but that's a 46% increase from the previous year. And so we are so proud of this. I'm so proud of my team and all the teachers that have put in so much dedicated work. And it's so rewarding when we see the payoff. So this is maybe, the next slide is probably my favorite one of the entire presentation, but I'll let Jessica talk about it.
Okay, so we all talk about closing the gap. And talking about closing the gap means is we don't want our kids to stay on the same trend line, which the our growth here is the green one. That's where we want to see our students. That's where we want to see their growth going forward. And it's not, and as a school, we decided it's not enough to keep up, just stay in tow with that line. We want to close that gap. And so these are a lot of our high risk students. And you can see here from our data from 10 weeks of intervention, like we all get emotional talking about this slide. Like, it's so cool. Like, we're literally closing the gap with our high risk, and even all of our other students, we're closing that gap. They're going above and beyond. If you can see, we've got 2 or 3 meeting standard, and then 2 or 3 going above that were super high risk. So this was so exciting to see and share with staff and our assistant, our superintendent and assistant superintendent.
And if we had the time, we'd share this from every single grade level, because we have similar slides from every single grade level. We're limited in time today, but this is really powerful data, because it's not just about students making achievement, but it's taking those most at-risk students and helping them see that change trajectory. So we're so excited about this work. Okay, so this next slide is all this is great. I know Leave kind of started it by saying the struggle was real. And so I'm gonna ask each of the different team members here to kind of share about, in brief, we're running out of time, team. So in brief, kind of what the struggle was. So I'll start with classroom teachers.
I'll go ahead and start. It was a huge struggle and a huge shift, but I think for our team, at this data meeting, we legitimately sat there and stared at each other and went, okay, I need you guys to just not talk for a minute. And we all just needed to sit there and think, like, okay, it wasn't what we thought we were coming for the meeting also. So Shannon and I both teach 4th grade. So we kind of were like, okay, we can do this. So not what I was thinking, like, let's give it a try. And I think that is, for me, the biggest message that you can take away from all of this is we got to just give it a try. Like, we're never going to know if we don't try.
Yes, and piggybacking on that, because I'm Cammie's teammate at 4th grade, I think, you can find yourself getting into what if conversations with kids sometimes in the classroom when they're not quite ready to start something. And I know that's where I was. Well, what if, or how do I? And I was trying to account for every little situation that could happen. And it was stressful. But one of the huge things that Chris and Lisa had said at our data team meeting was, you're trying to meet the needs of every child in your classroom during your core instruction. You're also trying to meet every child's needs during your small groups. And so now each teacher is going to have one small group focused on one set of skills. And so I kind of really hung on to that as we were making this transition.
Jessica and
yeah,
Kate.
I was gonna say I'll share because there are 2 resource room teachers here at Meadow Ridge. I'm intermediate, so I teach 4, 5, 6, and my counterpart is K through 4. We kind of split 4th grade because I have a pretty heavy caseload in 5th and 6th. So we were both at that 4th grade meeting that Cammie was talking about. And my counterpart, to put it lightly, she fell apart. She didn't know what this was gonna be. What am I going to do with my kids with IEPs? They have so much time in program, and all these questions, it's like, it'll be okay. We got to get it. And worried about the just worrying about the legalities of our IEPs too. But we went through all the right ways. We talked to parents, we got parent permission. And so we're like, no, we got to do this. We got to do this. And so it was nice that both of us didn't fall apart and I was all in and she wasn't. So I kind of drug her along with me and she's totally all in now. And I think she's really enjoying this, but there's still a daily struggle to try to make sure your kids get their time in program, to make sure we're consulting with the grade level teachers and the paras on the curriculum that they're using with our students that are on IEPs that we're not directly teaching every day with reading instruction.
Jessica, I'm glad that you bring up like the falling apart piece of it. It wasn't like this rollout was easy. It wasn't. There was definitely bumps along the way. And there's things that you have to give up. And, you know, as interventionists, we had to give up some of the autonomy that we have, and even classroom teachers. But I think I've heard the quote about if you focus on what you have to give up, then you will never change. So we really had to focus on what we were gaining through this process. And it was difficult. And I think after one of the early data meetings where we were rolling the system out, we had just finished. The data meeting had not gone the way that we hoped or planned that it would go. And we had Lisa and Chris and I had a short break before our next data meeting was scheduled, or our next grade level scheduled to come in. And we ran to Mod Pizza to get some lunch. And we just literally, the three of us just sat at the table, like so quiet. And if you know anything about Chris, it's not very often that he's really quiet. And we just stared at each other and we went, what are we doing? Is this okay? Should we give up? Should we keep going? What do we do? And we were really at the brink of just saying, you know what, forget it. This is going to be too hard. But I'm so grateful that we didn't, and I'm so grateful that we stuck with it. And there were things that we compromised on, but we really stuck to those things, those tight issues that we didn't give up. And so we pushed forward and we did it anyway.
Yeah, just for the principals in the room, that Mod Pizza meeting, it was a turning point, right? I mean, it would have been very easy. The easy move to please the teachers would have been to say, you know what, this is too fast. This isn't the right thing. Let's slow it down and let's study it for a year. And so often in my experience and in schools' experiences, that's what we do, is we slow down because it's the easy thing for adults to do. And when I took on this principalship, I really made a decision that kids were going to come first. And I knew this was the right thing by research, by watching other schools do it. And so I cashed in a lot of social capital. You hear about the cultural development for our first 2 years. There's a reason we created our presentation this way, and we had really, really good culture. And I cashed in a lot of it. I mean, honestly, I had teachers that didn't talk to me for a month. They were that upset, and these were some of my leaders on staff. But I'll tell you, it is worth it now, and almost everyone is totally on board. And so I would just look you principals in the eye, or other building or district leaders, and say, put the kids first, not the adults. This system has impacted kids in such a powerful way. We get emotional when we talk about it because we see the difference it's making in kids' lives. And it was really hard. But what the message I gave to my staff was, this is like riding a bike. We can study a bike all day long, but that's not going to teach you how to ride it. The only way to ride a bike is to get on it, start pedaling, and fall down and scrape your knee. And we had a lot of Band-Aids we used over this year because there was lots of scrapes and bumps and bruises along the way. And we're still figuring things out. It's certainly not a perfect system, but we're so proud of where we're at. And so we just wanted to be honest and real about that. I don't think it'd be fair for us to come here on a webinar and say, oh, this is easy peasy, no problem. Nope, you will have problems, and you'll be surprised about the people that resist this, because this is a really big change of what we're asking teachers to do. So as we look into moving into next year and beyond, year 4, you know, things have changed for us. March 17th and beyond, we have not been in school, and like everyone else in the state, right? And so we know our plan has changed. We are going to need time next year to heal and recover from the school closure. Lisa mentioned earlier the staff and student changes, the boundary changes. There is just a lot going on in our school that it would not be right to just continue barreling down the road and doing new things without taking the time to pause and really check on each other. It kind of gets back to our mantra of you matter, you belong, we're Meadow Ridge. If we're not caring for each other as a family first, nothing else matters. And so we're going to spend time in the leadership team and as a staff talking about what that looks like for our kids, talking about what that looks like for each other, and honestly talking about that as a nation, as a state. We're all in the similar boat right now with the COVID school closures. And so obviously, probably like all of you, we're really anxious to get back and see our kids. But we really want to make sure we're recognizing that before we just continue to move forward.
Another next step for us is really the work of the Guiding Coalition that we've toe dipped into a little bit this year. And you heard some of the teachers kind of mention that they now have more of a sense of urgency around meeting it. I think one of the great things about starting where we did with looking at RTI systems is it really highlighted for our staff and our school the need for priority standards and bringing some cohesiveness to not only each grade level's set of standards, but also vertical alignment across grade levels. And so we will be working through the process of identifying priority standards as we move forward this spring and into next year. And then another frequently asked question by our staff has been, when do we get to do this for math? So we are going to embark on an RTI for math journey next year as well. One of the things that I've been fielding a lot in some of your questions is how many paras do you have? How many resources do you have? We do not have title funding and we don't have a significant amount of LAP funding. So one of the things that is the work of Chris and I and the team this spring is to figure out a master schedule that will hold RTI for math and provide enough support. And that means that we'll be thinking outside the box and figuring out how we can best serve kids in math, knowing that that's a need and a desire for our teachers. And then we learned a lot this year, as I think we do every year. And so we'll continue to refine our RTI systems for reading and continue to make that even better. Make the master schedule do what we need it to do to support the programs that we've got, and continue to work through how do we improve PBIS for all of our kids. So it's exciting work. This year got short-circuited on all of us a little bit faster than we would have liked because we were so excited about the energy and the momentum, but I'm looking forward to just hitting the ground running when we get to come back and moving forward with some of these things.
Do you mind if I add something? Chris and Lisa and I and the other special ed team have been talking about also breaking down the walls, quite literally, with special ed, and getting rid of special ed classrooms, not having a classroom called resource room, not having a classroom called special education, but having two common learning spaces, one for larger groups, one for smaller groups, and having like a special ed office for LAP and special ed to share so we can collaborate better, and also to have all of our instructional materials in one place so everybody knows where they're at, what's being used, what do we have access to. And so that's one thing I'm super pumped for, is to see those walls literally be broken down and and those labels of special ed disappear. Then we don't have, oh, my kid can't go to that classroom because that's a special ed classroom. It's like, well, actually, it's not a special ed classroom. It's just a classroom.
By the way, she sounds so positive about that, but when we first floated the idea by Jessica, she did not like that idea so much.
Yeah.
Which really gets into our high leverage moves. We had 4 initiatives that we applied for this project for. Our PBIS systems, our master scheduling system, and our RTI system. And when we were applying for the grant, Lisa and Katie really pushed me on the 4th. And at first I didn't want to put it in, but as we look at everything that's happened, I really hope the red thread that you've seen is leadership development. And that's why we put it in there as our 4th, because this could not have been done with a single person, with a single LAP teacher or a single principal or assistant principal. This is truly a team effort. And while the 7 people represented Meadow Ridge here today are amazing, there are so many more amazing teachers. I really struggled with the UW team, like, well, how many teachers can I bring in for this webinar? And I kind of pushed it with how many I already brought in. But there's just so many people that have contributed to this that there's a couple of messages I want to leave you with. The picture of the dad there teaching his son how to ride a bike is so, so critically important. Get on the bike and start pedaling. If we would have just spent all year studying this, we would be no further down the road than if we would have just jumped in and made the hard decisions and had the uncomfortable conversations and had the awkward looks in the hallway at each other, because teachers are upset with me. I'll be honest, like I cashed in a lot of social capital with my teachers, and that's a risk. That's a risk for some principals, right? Because staffs can turn against you. But it was the right thing for kids, and I had the complete support and of my superintendent and assistant superintendent that were kind of encouraged me along the way. We also want to leave you with culture eats strategy for breakfast. If your culture is not right, ours was pretty good and it almost ate us when we did the RTI stuff, but you have to get your culture right. The culture of a school is so, so important, but you're not going to get there unless you start taking moves and pushing staff to do the right thing together and be a united front. Our staff hadn't done anything across grade levels all at once until I got here with their PBIS moves. And Cami touched about that in the beginning of our presentation, but that has just moved us forward so quickly as we've gone into the master schedule and then into RTI this year, where now when you walk into our building, it doesn't matter what grade level you teach, there's a real high sense of pride and culture and accomplishment that we have here in our building because we all work together. And finally, this message is for other principals. You have to empower your teacher leaders. You have to empower your teachers. Do not micromanage. You're not smart enough and you can't work hard enough to get all these systems in place on your own. I see principals all the time trying to do this, and it just frustrates me to no end, because when you micromanage, you limit the potential of your people. Don't do that. Release them and let them do the good work. Have the direction, hold them accountable to the direction they need to go, like you've heard us talk about a lot. But then be prepared to flex and work harder, because sometimes they'll come up with even better ideas than you can come up with. So one of the things we really try to do here at Meadow Ridge is, I hate the term buy-in. You hear that so often. I hope what you've seen today from this presentation was that there's ownership, that each of our teachers has really high ownership of this system. And that's reflected in all of our staff members across the school, from our teachers all the way down to our paraeducators and even our secretaries. There's a lot of pride in this, and it's because they all feel that. Not this program that Lisa and I have launched as principals. It's something that we've walked with them through together. And so I could spend much, much more time talking about these issues with you all, but I will end it with that. I want to thank my team. They're amazing. I feel so lucky and blessed to work with each of them. And I know we went a little over, Rena Marie, so I apologize for that, but I think we'll have some time for some Q&A, but I'll turn it. Do you want me to share my screen back with you, Rena Marie?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. Yes, if you can share it back to us at UW. And then, wow, I just want to, on behalf of the UW Hearing Center, just a tremendous thank you to Meadow Ridge Elementary for sharing their journey today. It's just a powerful message of where they've been and where they're going. And I myself, as a fellow educator, am leaving very inspired. And we hope, too, that all you attendees have many takeaways that you can have. So we'd love for you to share in the chat box, what are some systems of culture and our leadership practices you heard about today that support inclusive schools? And again, we'll be able to see everything that was shared in the chat now and at a later time. So we appreciate in advance you sharing, because this is helpful information for our team.
Rena Marie, I'm coming. It's just skipping a minute.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. So good. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Hearing the bicycle analogy was powerful. Thank you. Awesome. Meadow Ridge. Lots of takeaways, lessons learned, good advice moving forward. No labels, special quote rooms. All students get what they need. Oh, it's fantastic. To extend that, I'd like to invite participants to also share from the second question, from what you learned today, what are some initial steps that you could take back and apply in your building? Yeah, right. Our school team shared a lot of amazing things that we tried, but we know that change comes from a small start. So starting small, block scheduling, pause, putting students' needs first. Oh, scheduling instruction first, not last. Master scheduling process, starting a discussion about RTI groups. Love the all-encompassing vision. Data, yes, those were great graphs. It shows that the main stakeholders, right, are students, and they are the ones who are benefiting from all this hard effort. Culture eat strategies for breakfast. Yeah, that's my favorite too. Master scheduling. Bravery, passion, reward. Oh, wonderful, everybody. Katie, we can go ahead. Thank you. You know, Meadow Ridge did an amazing job of responding to the Q&A during the presentation. So I think those questions have all been answered or in the chat. So if there is anything else that anybody would like to share in a question, you can put that up, and I'll extend it to Meadow Ridge. If there was a question that you responded to that you would like to speak to with the group, that would be great too.
I'll just kind of verbally answer one. I know there's some of my team has been trying to answer it. I know there's some questions about like, wait, how do you do the SDI minutes with special ed and all those different pieces? And the great news is, yep, that was one of the struggles we've had, is figuring all those different pieces out and working with our special ed department, but also looking at the guidance from the state. And if you really look at what the state's trying to do right now, it is following this process and protocol and doing what's best for kids instructionally. And so we have just held on to that vision and really pushed for it, and had really strong communication with parents, had strong communication with classroom teachers, special education teachers, our school psychologists, our special education administrators, and so on and so forth. And so, yep, it's required a lot of background information. If we had a 3-hour webinar just on our RTI system, we could probably get into much more of that. And if there's things you're struggling with, we can certainly try to answer that further in a follow-up email or a conversation as well. But just that is one of the bigger things we have wrestled with. But we know it's the right thing for kids, and we know it's the direction that the state is moving, to have more inclusive education for all students, because the research shows, right, it's the best thing for kids. And so that's where you just have to push through sometimes as a leader and as a team to say, we know this is the right thing for kids, and so we are going to remove obstacles in a way to make sure we get there and not let those obstacles hurt what's best for kids. Team, is there anything else you wanted to add on to that part of it?
I saw there is a comment that appreciated seeing RTI and PBIS working together hand in hand. And I just wanted to speak to the fact of those common area expectations when it came to establishing those were super important, because then when we rolled out RTI, we didn't necessarily have to worry about the classroom management piece, because those common area expectations were put in place for all students across the entire school.
Also, when we talk about multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS, everything we talked about today falls under MTSS, in our opinion, because PBIS and RTI are just smaller branches of the overall picture of how are we supporting all students with systems that work, with the emphasis on creating really excellent core instruction and then creating systems to support off of that. So we didn't get to talk to about a lot of our tier 2 and tier 3 PBIS supports, for example, today, but those are things that we've been developing in the background as well to support those kids that need more behavioral supports. And that is obviously very closely linked to RTI, because a lot of times what we know about students is when their behavior escalates, it's often related to maybe they're struggling academically as well. And so partnering with our amazing special ed team, our lab teachers, our awesome PLCs and gen ed teachers, and really created a teaming environment to meet the needs of students is really what we're all about.
There's a question in the webinar chat, and it says, what are teachers and leaders in your building feeling is important, and how can you use that to start a change? I would say, just to kind of address that question, it goes back to, I think, what Shannon was talking about with our guiding coalition, and Leave mentioned this also, that we really jumped into this without having power standards. And so I think that now is where our building is at, is really identifying some specific standards and seeing how we can branch those standards and align those standards across grade levels. And so I think that's where I see a lot of our building finding our biggest need. And then like Chris just said, and then adding some of that PBIS piece into there as well for those tier 2 and tier 3 students. But does anybody else see that? I don't know what else you're finding is important right now to answer that question. No.
Well, thank you for responding to those questions. We like to leave you for a little bit of information to learn more about the demonstration sites project. You can visit our website at the UW Herring Center Demo Sites Project, and also there's a link for OSPI, and again, that information will have been shared via email with our participants. We'd like to invite everybody to share with this interactive poll. I'll go ahead and put this link in our chat box, but you can go to pollev.com/UW Herring Center to type in your response, or text UW Herring Center to 22333 to join, and then you may text your message. We'd invite you all to share in one word, what are the systems, culture, and or leadership practices you heard today that support inclusive schools? Oh, terrific. Teaming, innovation, leadership, collaboration. Oh, yes. Yeah. Innovation, motivate, empowerment, students first, strategy. I hear a lot come through that, see in the chat box, the bicycle analogy. Yes, just ride the bike, get on, get going. Well, please feel free to continue to do this. We're going to be able to capture all these responses, and it's tremendous feedback for our Meadow Ridge team. Kay, we can go ahead and move on to our next slide here. Great. So we invite everybody to fill out an evaluation, and we have a clock hour form. The link for the evaluation form and clock hours have been emailed to all participants. Here is also a link to that Google form for an evaluation as well. We love to get feedback on our session today, and this will give us really valuable information to use to effectively share demo sites journey in this webinar format in the future. We just thank everybody for your time this morning, and again, just an amazing presentation from Meadow Ridge, and we like to also thank our partners with OSPI, C-STEP for strengthening teaching one step at a time, and our amazing Meadow Ridge Jaguars team. Right. And just a reminder, those forms and links that we shared will be, Molly Lyman will send that out immediately following this webinar, so you can look for that in your inbox. And of course, don't hesitate to email if you have other questions or concerns. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your time with us today.
Well, and from the Meadow Ridge team, I just want to thank the UW folks and all of you. We are very humbled to have so many people here for our webinar. We feel very humbled to even be part of this process. So thank you for your positive feedback, and we are here to learn from all of you as well. And so if we can be of any support along the way, you have our contact information. Please feel free to reach out to us, and yeah, have a great day. Thank you, everyone.
I just want to thank Chris and his amazing team, and Rena and Marie for great facilitation, and the rest of our team for pulling this off. And what a great presentation. What an inspiring morning. Thank you so much.
So can I just ask you guys, I know there's some few people here still, but I know it looks like most people are logging out. So since this was recorded, do you know when that will be available? If others are interested in it, like I can point them to it. I know my superintendent and assistant superintendent wanted to view it, but couldn't participate this morning, for example, those kinds of things.
Yeah, we'll have it up on our, and all the participants know this, we'll have it up by the end of the month on our website under your kind of section, and we'll make sure to email you and alert you that it's up.
Perfect. And I saw your email, Cassidy. Our team will work on the artifacts and try to get a lot of those together and sent to you. So
thank you. Yeah, I think, yeah, beautiful job today, you guys. Really nice.
Oh,
thank you. Thank you all for your support. That was fun.
Incredible.
You guys did awesome. That was really, really, really engaging.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think you're going to have a line outside your door in the fall, though. Yeah.
Oh, really?
We'll be right at the front. The Hearing Center will be leading that line, but.
Yeah, that's the next step, right? Like, how do we set these in-person site visits up? So that'll be fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
That just means we got to go back to school.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Will you be able to share with us the evaluation protocols as well for the team? Okay, perfect.
Yes. We'll be able to, share all that. And then we get a transcript of the chat and everything too. And we'll be able to share our responses too from the word cloud, so you can see what really resonated with participants.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
We'll have a lot of data to share.
And then once you guys get through, I know your week's filled with these webinars from the other sites as well. And then we'll get all this up. And then I'm guessing we'll just kind of wait for direction from our health officials and governors to kind of know what the next steps are with this process. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I anticipate that we'll kind of, like we talked about at the beginning, continue to provide some professional development in terms of online learning webinar format. As we talked about at the beginning, I think pulling out those, maybe specific strategies, and after we look at our evaluations and feedback data, we can kind of figure out where to go next. And then, I mean, the goal would be potentially, to, I know, the school visits, but that will have to do with, whatever guidance we get from the state and from OSPI, and what we're allowed and not allowed to do, and what makes sense in terms of keeping everyone safe and all of that. But our ultimate goal is to have these demonstration sites up and running.
Well, we're looking forward to it. It should be fun.
Yeah, we are too.
Jessica, it looked as if
Oh.
people really enjoyed your quote. That's
Oh,
great. Yeah.
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 I got my PBIS poster just below it too.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah, I thought it was perfect too. I noticed when Shannon was talking, I'm like, oh, there's her thermometer right there.
Yeah.
This thermometer. There's your little paw next to it.
Yeah.
We didn't even plan that.
All right, my UW team, I gotta jump off. Meadow Ridge, it was good to see you guys. You guys did awesome. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, thanks again. And we know this took a lot of